Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing AGUIRRE, The Wrath of God. This film came out in 1972. It was written and directed by Werner Herzog. Herzog has been labeled over time as a mad artist, somebody who makes controversial work and is certainly a controversial personality, and he's never boring, that's for sure. And whether you love him or hate him, I think you do have to admire just the amount of bravura and passion that goes into his work. He's a very curious person and he doesn't give a fuck, and those are two things that I think work together quite brilliantly, and I admire people like that. And he's somebody who has dabbled in all kinds of different art forms, and AGUIRRE, The Wrath of God was, I think, maybe his first real passion project that he delved into headfirst. And I think because it was so early on in his career, you know, there were a lot of limitations for sure, but rather than those becoming a detriment to the film, he turns them into a major strength. Made for very little money, and he shot it on a 33mm camera that he stole from the Munich film school. He has interest certainly in documentary filmmaking, as well as inspiration from French New Wave is really evident here, because it has that handheld quality to it, very immersive sort of filmmaking that is low budget. And you feel like another member of these people that are searching for El Dorado. You're not a fly on the wall, you are like an actual member of the community, of the people. So it feels very organic and very stripped down and everything, and yet there is an incredible dichotomy in that it is still so cinematic. There are a lot of contradictions in this film, and I think that is the key to why it is so powerful. It has a very brief runtime, and yet there is a really kind of meditative quality where you kind of forget about time at all. The rawness of everything, the fact that everything is so stripped down. It reminds me a lot of the simplicity of a lot of films that you might have gotten from something like The Virgin Spring by Ingmar Bergman. And even though this film isn't low budget, it reminds me of it. Just the authenticity of the imagery would be Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick. The opening of the film is absolutely mesmerizing. It's just, it hooks you right away. And you know, there's a quality to it that, even though it is full of greed and barbarity in terms of the story and exposing a lot of the darkness of humanity, there is a spiritual quality to the opening and a transcendence. There's something very spiritual about it, and I think it sets you up for what you're in for. And there's really no major dialogue or anything like that, just kind of loose words here and there. Herzog is really allowing you to settle into the world. He's interested in the world building and telling visually rather than with the words. And here it feels very natural, very real. A lot of the pathos for me comes from the most simple moments. The textures, the sensory details of everything feels very individual and very worn, very specific to the period. And yet it has this sort of timelessness to it at the same time. It has a sort of ethereal, lysergic, I'm going to use that word, a lysergic sort of abandon to it. And I feel this tone very specifically, and it only really exists in this sort of way from films that came out in the late 60s and the early 70s. And admittedly, I do have a soft spot in my heart for those kinds of films because it's captured in that specific way, and it never really was again. The musical score for me is one of the most effective elements in the film. To me, it's kind of essential to the ethereal vibe. It was written by I think a German progressive rock band named Popol Vuh. Much like a band that, you know, around the same time, like Tangerine Dream, I think that they were able to create that same sort of ambient, very atmospheric, very cinematic quality to the soundscape. It's much more about the textures layering over one another rather than like the melody. It seems quite simple, and yet there's a lot going on there. It feels incredibly modern. It has a new age quality to it where it feels like it could fit into any time period and still feel very relatable. But it is, dare I say, psychedelic. Yes, take your shots. Which gives you the feeling of very kind of cosmic. It doesn't belong on any timeline of any sort. I could be on mushrooms in this period looking up at the ceiling listening to this score, or I could be a hippie in the woods in the 1960s, or I could be on an El Dorado mission in the 16th century. And it all seems to make sense. This film deals with some very vulnerable and very human themes. It's all about facing yourself, facing your ego, and especially at the end of everything, at the end of the world when you've lost everything, that's when you are your most susceptible. You're forced to face mortality and your sins before your time is up, and yet still there is a quality to the cinematography and the music that encapsulates a real haunting beauty about that. Even in the midst of brutality and barbarity and evil, the camera really lingers on the faces and really getting to know the people just through the look. And that's what's moving about the world. That's what makes it feel very rich and complex, because the world is so many things, and no matter how dark things get, there is still intrigue, there is still beauty. This film is about life, and it's also about death. The two working together at the same time, almost as if they exist simultaneously in the same body, in the same stream of consciousness, being asleep and being awake at the same time as well. It has a very dreamy sort of quality to it. And Aguirre even references the being asleep and awake thing with the sloth, which could be interpreted as a sort of metaphor for being spiritually awakened or whatever. But to me, this film is very much a snake eats its tail sort of thing, where all of the light and the darkness feed into one another as though they are this beautiful, very unique organism. It inspired a lot of what Apocalypse Now became, several years later, and you can easily see the similarities between the films, visually, of course, especially when they're floating down the river, but also thematically, for sure. The line that I think really captures it in Apocalypse Now is the line that Brando has at the beginning of the film, where he's talking about the snail crawling on the edge of the razor blade. And I feel like the whole point of that is to really face the demons and face the ugly parts of yourself in order to truly transcend and become that fully dimensional human being who can have that perspective. In order to comprehend life and death, you have to face that mortality. You have to face your sins in the most bold way possible in order to, again, transcend the physical realms. And this might mean going a little mad. We all go a little mad sometimes, getting a little violent, getting a little nasty. And that is the essence of evil, as well as fire. And how the human race, no matter how good you are, is always flirting with that idea between, just complete darkness and goodness constantly. And in this film, you have somebody at the center of the film, a villain here, who embodies all of that poison of the soul. Somebody who I think embodies a lot of the weaknesses of humanity, and yet at the same time, he's really skirting the line between that complete destruction and anger and a complete level of zen amidst the chaos, kind of like the Joker. There is really only one person who could have played this role. You couldn't imagine anybody else in it, and that would of course be Klaus Kinski. Though at the time this may not have been so obvious, but now it's like, yeah, of course you can't imagine many people in the role other than him. Maybe if they remade it, I think Willem Dafoe might be able to pull it off. But other than that, no, Klaus Kinski forever. I think he has such an extraordinary face. That image is just burned into your memory. He's a man who had quite the life, and you should look it up if you haven't. It's really fascinating. But he certainly had major struggles in his life, especially with his own sanity and loss of control. An extremely volatile man, but so was Herzog. And those energies, while they may have been toxic, they also kind of fired each other up, I think, creatively. And I think that's part of the point of view of the film as well, and why I think it really feels that believable and real. It's unrelenting, just like these two guys. It feels free. It feels open to the possibility of danger completely consuming the body and the soul, the danger of that wildness. Kinski is also somebody who clearly has a lot of pain that he's dealt with in his life, and all of that comes through in this very manic, very brutal, intense, virile, almost androgynous energy. And it's all in those bulging, big blue eyes that they seem to pierce right through your gut. And that deranged, like fully unsound mind sort of look in the eye, you can't fake that. You really can't. I've seen the look for real many times, and he has it. And there's something really great about that being captured on camera, I think. I want to draw him so much. This character in some ways feels completely ready to face the towering inferno, and yet isn't ready at the same time. But it's all just in as I say, the look, but also just the physicality. The body language is very distinct. The way he stands, the way he kind of slouches as he kind of looks up at you. It's very, it's very intense. He's playing the system like every great villain does. He has that kind of confidence and that abandon. He is setting people up and killing them off. One by one, really, because he's tenacious and gritty and he knows what he wants. And yet for all of his efforts and all through his motives, of course, of greed and materialism, it leaves him just like everyone else. It leaves him stranded and mad and lost to his own desires. And yet somehow, while being engulfed by the flames, metaphorically, it's like he's laughing the whole way through. It's an amazing concept and an amazing thing to witness. And yes, there is that violence, of course, that component to the film, as I've said, but again, you can't forget about that transcendent spiritual quality that I mentioned before, and it's the key, because it expresses the beauty of life ending and all that comes with that loss of everything. It's a freedom. And as the film goes on, as these characters float down the Amazon, they're starting to have that inner reflection more and more. They're losing that identity. They're becoming further and further removed from the society that they know. And the more that it goes on, the more that the movie starts to get real wigged out, and you feel trapped in a sort of way, like, almost like you're trapped in a dream that you can't wake up from. And it starts to get kind of hazy, just slightly off though. Not enough to be, really jarring or anything, but just enough where it feels very claustrophobic almost, so that your expectations are melting away little by little. And as the hallucinations start to happen, you start to really buy into them. And through this process, it becomes more and more devastating, the loss. Many are sacrificed, and yet, even so, as I said, even when Aguirre himself is faced with his own demons, he's delusioned to the end. He's all alone, completely lost, surrounded by water, carnage, death, and monkeys, naturally. This film is extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary. It's the kind of film that when I watch it, I tend to be pretty critical, and I'm kind of organizing my thoughts when I watch films as I go, just because it makes it easier for me to culminate my thoughts at the end. But this one, I just completely gave into it. I let go. The analytical aspects of me go away, and I think that is, the most special kind of film. Not trying to think too much, just taking it in. And it is an experience unlike any other. This might be one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, it's that good. It's the kind of movie you feel it in your pores, and it's like you sweat it out, almost like it's an ayahuasca ceremony. And the contrast, the constant light and dark of the film is what's so amazing about it. It transports you to another place completely, and yet it feels so intimate, like it's happening right now in your life. And it's everything that I love about movies, just everything that I love personally, that boldness to explore consciousness and film as an art and mankind as a concept in all these sorts of ways that tie in together and they mean something. The way that a Jodorowsky film means something, or the way that a Tarkovsky film means something. It's that kind of passion where you can tell that literal blood, sweat, and tears went into it. And even as the creator, I think, you've got to get a little nutty in order to be able to arrive at something this special. You really also have to face your own toxicity and artistic existentialism along the way and come to terms with it. And when that comes through in a film, it is just, to me, utterly powerful. So please watch this film. Seriously, watch it. If you love Apocalypse Now, I think you'll absolutely love this. And that is my review. Thank you all so much for watching. If you look over here, you will see my Patreon supporters. You guys are incredible, as always. You can also check out my website below, deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist. I sell commissioned portraits and prints, and if that's something that interests you, you can always email me below, and I'm happy to work with you, answer any questions about that. And other than that, you can find all my social media information below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.